The NHL Stanley Cup Final is here, and the Florida Panthers will face the Edmonton Oilers. This is a direct rematch of last year's Stanley Cup Final. The wild part is that this is the first time we have a direct rematch in consecutive years since 2008 and in 2009, where the Penguins and the Detroit Red Wings faced off, and they went 1-1 in those two series. Hockey fans are buzzing with excitement, especially in Canada. Canadian hockey fans have been starving for a Stanley Cup for 32 years now. The last time a Canadian team has won a cup was in 1993, and it was the Montreal Canadiens. And right now, in back-to-back years, the Oilers hold the best chance of winning the Stanley Cup.
It shows how hard it is to get to the Stanley Cup Final in back-to-back years. Obviously, certain teams have done it. Not the Chicago Blackhawks, right? Obviously, Pittsburgh, when they won back-to-back years. Detroit, Pittsburgh, you mentioned earlier. And like there was teams in the 90s, 80s, right? The funny thing is the Oilers, as a franchise, have experienced this before. Right before that Detroit-Pittsburgh one, it was the Oilers direct rematch with the New York Islanders. That dynasty Islanders team that came to an end there before the Oilers started their dynasty. The Oilers also had one with Philadelphia where they won both times, except it was a year apart, kind of like the Lakers and Celtics 08 and 2010, that type of vibe. Obviously, it shows like when like the NBA now is the parity league, but we once upon a time saw Heat Spurs back-to-back years. Obviously, those classic Warriors and Cavaliers matchups as well. But it shows once again that hockey, anything can happen in these games, and where we've seen that this year once again, where we thought the Edmonton Oilers were a shell of themselves heading into this playoffs. And since the LA Game 3, essentially, or officially since that Game 4 when Quinton Byfield could not clear the damn puck, they flipped the script.
Essentially looked like they started trying, because the first two games, it just did not look like they were trying.
They were, I guess, relying on Stuart Skinner too much. Big mistake. Then they decided, no, we should try on defense because we have Pickard, who went undefeated before he got hurt, and then did the same thing with Skinner.
All right, and one more wild stat is that for now, 6 years in a row, a Florida team is also in the finals. 3 years in a row, Tampa Bay Lightning did it, and now the last 3 years, the Florida Panthers did it. And obviously, that itself is a tough task, because the Florida teams, there are only two teams, right? It's not like it's California where there's three, or New York and / New Jersey, there's three. Like, you have two teams dominating the East for the last 6 years, which also in that sense is very impressive as well.
It's impressive, and I'm not getting into the debate of the low no state income tax or whatever the income tax situation where Canada, obviously now Edmonton's gotten here, but like we saw this California, whatever. I don't know the laws of the U.S., but we know how the Canada people avoid Canada because of that reasons. I'm not gonna get into that. At the end of the day, they know how to. Both of those teams knew how to build rosters. Both of those teams were smart with their cap situations. Were able to get, like, at the end of the day, Florida Panthers picked Sam Bennett early from the Flames, cheap, right? Matthew Tkachuk only wanted Florida. I get that, but still, at the end of the day, they needed to move on from pieces. They did, like Jonathan Huberdeau, who was arguably one of their greatest players in franchise history, you could say. They moved off of him pretty quickly, and along with Mackenzie Weegar. And they bet on Bobrovsky, very expensive at the time, paid out. And last but not least, Sam Reinhart. He left a situation in Buffalo. Granted, Buffalo has a lot of other drama going on right now, especially with the people wanting to leave. But they took a flyer on him as well, and he elevated even more. They were able to develop people. They moved off of Andrew Brunette. People thought Andrew Brunette should have stayed as coach after the whole Joel Quenneville had to leave. He did well. They're like, well, why would you not bring him up? Including myself. I was a little surprised. But you bring in a guy like Paul Maurice, and you see what the situations are for these last couple of years as well.
The Florida Panthers have done a great job of just finding the best out of each and every player. They have developed players, whether that be from, their upbringing or from other teams' upbringing. Players that were, I guess, lost causes for other teams, they brought in and made them better and the best version of himself. This is the best version of Tkachuk, best version of Reinhart, the best version of Gustav Forsling. And right now, I know he was very good in Columbus, but we're seeing the best version of Sergei Bobrovsky as well. But before we move into the actual breakdown and the predictions, I just want to mention this, or bring up this question quickly. How much of a W this is for the NHL that this rematch happened? Because the way I look at it, last year, this is the series that put them on the map. This is the series that got Americans hyped up for hockey. And obviously on top of that, they dubbed up with the Four Nations.
Yeah.
And now you're seeing a rematch again. Whereas the NBA at the end of the day is not the most exciting finals because it's not the biggest of teams. They're great players in that NBA finals. Don't be
Canadian
wrong.
Four.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, by the way, go subscribe to Beyond the Basket. We drop a lot of basketball content there as well. So if you guys are new to this channel and are also basketball fans, Beyond the Basket will be linked down in the description below. Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button there as well.
So when I'm looking at it, this is such a W for the NHL and just for the viewership of the NHL that this rematch is happening, because last year it was a classic.
Yeah, no, like obviously it didn't start out that way. Then McDavid stepped up, right? The best player in the world's involved, right? As I mentioned, how Florida was able to find these gems, right? If you have the 2 of the 5 best players of the world, right? Maybe 2 of the top 3, we already know who number 1 is, but Leon Draisaitl being the other guy as
2
well.
is the top 2, honestly.
It could be, yeah. But like obviously to me, I'm gonna say top 3 because I have McKinnon. But that being said, you're gonna have people join your team that way. That at the end of the day, it sucks for other teams, but that's the beneficiary of when you have the best players in the world. And those players like Corey Perry, like Evander Kane, have all stepped up. There's a reason why Zach Hyman left Toronto and signed a big contract. Unfortunately, he's missing the Stanley Cup Finals, but he joined that team, and it was great for him last year because he had 50 plus goals in the regular season. I had great postseason this year and last year as well, right? So, like, yeah, it's a dub. You have the best player in the world involved, and you have what is right now a mini dynasty in the Florida Panthers showing up. And it's still, and the best part about this is it's not predictable, right? It's very unpredictable. It's split, right? Like no one thought the Oilers were going to be this good this year heading into the playoffs. I certainly didn't. They handled Dallas very easily. They handled Vegas, who I thought were going to beat them, no debate about it, and they beat them in 5. Right,
they handled them.
It is the best situation for the NHL, 100%, especially coming off a crazy Four Nations face-off as well.
Yeah, they're dubbing up, and there's one last thing. Like no matter what's gonna happen in this series, whether it be one team dominate or it goes to the wire, is also a new rivalry that just brewed, because like when do we see rematches like this? I know like obviously East versus West, there's not many rivalries, but like when there's at the end of the day, there's bad blood, right? There's respect, but there's also bad blood. Edmonton wants revenge. Florida wants to repeat and be a dynasty, right? There's many storylines for why each team wants to win and genuinely beat up the other team. And right now, both teams, when you're coming into it, are very experienced off of last year. The Florida, the last couple of years, obviously when they made the finals and lost to Vegas, that was a Cinderella run. They were running on emotions, and being, I guess, emotional, being too high or / being too low doesn't help in these situations. They learned from that last year, and obviously they're calm heading into it. This year, when you compare Edmonton's trophy Western Conference Finals win from this year and last year was all hype, buzz. You know, it didn't feel like they needed to handle more business, because at the end of the day, it felt like they were just excited to be there, right? And it kind of showed in early on the series. They were down 0-3, right? And McDavid had to yell at their asses after game 2. Where this year, they look calm, they're happy they're won, but they're like, nah, we don't want this. Yeah. We still need 4 more. So both teams are coming in this prepped, both teams are coming this emotionally stable, and both teams know what they need to do to win the Stanley Cup. Hence why this is so unpredictable. Hence why this is one of the newer rivalries in hockey. And hence why this is the best case scenario for the NHL. But let's get right into the matchups and the game breakdown and our predictions. And we'll start off with, at the end of the day, on paper, it's always going to be advantage Florida for goaltending. But I can't say that right now with the way that Stuart Skinner is playing.
Yeah. Now listen, at the end of the day, Bobrovsky started off slow. But that Hurricane series, he stepped up. Right?
Not even the Hurricane, like from Game 5 onwards.
Toronto onwards too. But like, listen, it's funny because these two teams, I feel like, kind of swapped roles in a sense. Edmonton had a more, harder matchups, but easier run, you could say. Like the way the series ended up going. Florida had they handled Tampa. Don't get me wrong, but it was still a tough matchup, right? But then that grueling series against Toronto at the end of the day, obviously handled business 2 of the last 3 games they played. And then obviously they handled Carolina. So it's somewhat-ish opposite. I'm not going to say it's completely opposite, because Edmonton last year, obviously the only 2 teams that took Edmonton to 7 were the Canucks last year and Florida themselves, which Florida obviously made it to go to 7. In terms of the matchups, listen, it's going to be Stuart Skinner. I don't know what to expect. Again, simple as that. The formula seems to be start him. He's going to be shit. Bench him. then he'll probably come in either on a Pickard injury or a Pickard loss, which last year was because of a Pickard loss. This year was because of a Pickard injury. He comes back in, and he was a difference maker in the Dallas series, especially Game 3, where Dallas had all the shots, right? And then they could have won that game. And then obviously Game 5 as well, in my opinion. Last year he did the same thing against Dallas. So yeah, at the end of the day, but I'm still going to lean Bobrovsky.
Obviously, you're going to lean Bobrovsky. You still have to pick Bobrovsky. Like I said before, if anyone has Stuart Skinner figured out, they are the most intelligent hockey mind in the world, because that dude is just something very unpredictable. But here's when I'm looking at it in terms of goalie battle. Stuart Skinner tends to struggle early in series, right? Usually that's the case kind of last year and somewhat this year, obviously LA being the biggest example. And that's where I feel like, the Florida Panthers took advantage, and that's how they got like a 3-0 lead, is because Bobrovsky was on his game from game 1, and Stuart Skinner was shaky. He was playing okay, but he couldn't play like the next level he was like against Dallas.
Edmonton is also home ice this time. Advantage.
That's also a big factor as well. And that's stay tuned for our predictions, because that's going to be a big factor of what my predictions will be near the end of the video. But right now, when I'm looking at it, Florida needs to take the edge in the first 2 games, because that's where they'll have the best goalie matchup advantage. Because it's Bobrovsky, obviously we know who he is. Stuart Skinner tends to struggle early on in series, in my opinion.
Defensively, I mean, again, should be easy, Florida, but just the way Edmonton has been playing. They got Ekholm back now for these finals. He came back in Game 5 against Dallas. But everybody else just stepped up. They put in, listen, at the end of the day, I know we're going to talk about coaching matchup as well, but I'm going to briefly bring it into this right now. Chris Knobloch made we made decisions, right? Darnell Nurse was not good in those first 2-3 games in LA. He brings in a guy like Troy Stecher. Troy Stecher made a difference. like we know him well from or his days in Vancouver. Rick nicknamed Troy from Richmond for a reason. But what he has done, like lineup adjustment wise, has been good. Now you got your number 1 pairing back in Ekholm as well, and other players have stepped up. They put their bodies on the line. Meanwhile, Florida, Gustav Forsling, probably one of the, up there with the best defensemen in the league, with Jacob Slavin and Chris Tanev. You obviously got Aaron Ekblad, who's not suspended or injured. You brought in a guy like Seth Jones to power play wise as well, and then like a guy like Nate Schmidt in the first round was scoring goals like crazy for you. Like he's like your OEL replacement, I guess, for this year. So like they are going to be just good defensively regardless. We know how physical they play, their presence and all that. So yeah, the matchup for me still, personnel-wise, lean towards Florida, but if you're looking at playing-wise right now, you could say they're somewhat even.
I mean, yeah, it's similar with the goaltending matchup. Right now, it's somewhat even. Seth Jones, bringing in him was important, because I feel like he is kind of the Montour replacement, right? A very good puck mover in the back was Montour last year for them, and obviously Seth Jones has filled that role incredibly. Mikola has had a great series against Carolina. He also somehow scored 2 goals in Game 3. He also picked up an injury but came back in Game 5. He only missed Game 4. So when you're looking at it in that standpoint, physicality-wise, I will edge Florida just from top to bottom, because that's what they're built around, essentially, defensively. But on the Edmonton side, Bouchard and Ekholm was the best defensive pairing last Stanley Cup playoffs. Right, period. Like they had the great balance of obviously offense provided by Bouchard, with Ekholm leveling out, and having them back is going to be so very important, and that's such a big W for the Edmonton Oilers. And one last thing I'm going to bring up is be more special teams. Oilers have done good killing penalties on home ice.
Horrible away.
Horrible on the road, right? And good news for them, because they got first 2 games in Edmonton, and I think they should be fine with terms of killing penalties. And on top of that, their power play obviously is sick, because obviously we already know who they have. They just dominate when they're on the power play. So obviously Florida, they're going to have to find I know they have found the great balance. That's why they're here. But they're really going to have to hone in on the balance of physicality and discipline, because if you take stupid penalties, you will get punished by the Edmonton Oilers, because we're going to transition to offense. And this is where the Oilers' advantage comes from. And that is because of McDavid and Leon Draisaitl.
McDavid, Draisaitl, obvious answers. We don't need to go too much into it. We've seen what they can do. Listen, but the first 3 games, Barkov did a good job on McDavid. I'll say that much. Right, then we know what McDavid did after. Like he had 11 points in the finals or whatever it was to close and the next 4 games. By the end of the day, Barkov is this version of Bergeron now. Right, since Bergeron's retired, he's a new Bergeron in my opinion, and he's the best defensive forward in the game Again, in my opinion, I don't know if you agree or disagree with that.
I agree.
So we know that they have the capability to slow him down on certain cases. But at the end of the day, it's McDavid and it's Draisaitl. Either you load them up if something's struggling, or on separate lines, you have to be worried about those two guys on the ice no matter what. 30 to 40 minutes of it, depending on how their lines shape up. That being said, though, on Florida's side, Kachuk, like, he had his up and downs because of the injury, right? Like, Carter Verhaeghe kind of stepped up in this last series a little bit, especially in the clutch time as well. Sam Reinhart, has been fine as well. Again, the Carolina series is when these guys officially or the game 5 onwards from Toronto is when they officially kind of got going and they woke up a little bit. It was concerning. I think
Barkov has done a good job scoring himself
exactly
as well.
Their depth, but both teams' depth has helped them a lot. Right, in this series, like their third line, Florida's was really big, and then Edmonton, there were games where like it was Evander Kane, it was Corey Perry, especially on the power play, it was Connor Brown somehow getting a puck going on a breakaway against, I think it was Vegas or whoever, LA or whatever it was. Both teams' depth has stepped up, right? And obviously, Edmonton's depth needs to step up because the loss of Zach Hyman is immense, because he was a hitting machine. I believe he was leading their team in hits as well. The physicality was there. Again, he's out for the playoffs completely now. So a guy like Jeff Skinner is now brought back into it. He was scratched for pretty much the whole playoffs except games 1 and 2, I believe, in LA. A guy who's been waiting to play in playoff hockey got his first goal in the playoffs in game 5 there as well. But so their depth now with the loss of Hyman has to step up even more. They did that in game 5 so far. Obviously, balance that out with Ekholm both ways, like defensively on the side of things. But the depth is pretty much even throughout. Obviously, the star power favors Edmonton, no doubt about that.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
The depth is relatively even.
Oilers' depth has stepped off. Even like Arvidsson and Podkolzin have like shown up in these like couple games and like won some games for the Oilers so far. Sam Kapanen, I think he got the winner in the Vegas series, I believe, to close that series out. Here's the last thing I'm going to say about this, and obviously this is why Florida has been back here for 3 years in a row now, is that these guys obviously are built on two-way talent, right? Obviously, you mentioned Barkov, which is the obvious one. I guess, the new Bergeron essentially is like a fair thing to stay. But Reinhart has a great defensive game to himself. Obviously, Sam Bennett has stepped up offensively this year. He's a playoff player. Matthew Tkachuk is obviously great on both ends of the ice. So it's not like just the defenseman's job to slow down McDavid and Draisaitl. They have the forwards to obviously slow down McDavid and Draisaitl, and we saw Barkov and Bennett do it last year to some sort of degree, because at the end of the day, that's the only way you could do it. Slow down McDavid and Draisaitl is to some sort of degree, and that's where you get the advantage from, and that's why the Florida Panthers are built like that, because I guess having two-way players is so important. If you're having teams that are so defensive, you can't get scoring, kind of like the Carolina Hurricanes, and obviously when the goal scoring dries out, which it did in the Florida series, they can't really do anything. But then you have teams that are so offensive, right, that obviously if they keep conceding, they're going to be out there scoring, trying to win 6-5 games and all that stuff. Yeah. Which is, the Florida Panthers, at the end of the day, their roster construction is you're looking at battle of roster constructions. The Oilers have their 2 budding superstars they drafted, they developed, homegrown, all that stuff, and they surrounded pieces around them. The Florida Panthers roster construction and philosophy is balance between physicality and discipline, balance between offense and defense, and each and every player almost on this roster provides that. Now it's prediction time. Amar's prediction for the Stanley Cup Final is that the Florida Panthers will go back-to-back, and they will do it in 6 games. My prediction is that this series will end on someone's home ice. So I do agree with the Panthers in 6, but my actual pick will be Oilers getting their revenge, and they will do that in Game 7. Comment your guys' predictions down below.